In this video, we're going to be looking at the practical benefits of personality typology. By the end of this video, you'll understand how you think, how other people think, and how to influence people based on how they think. The personality typology system we'll use is called MBTI, which consists of 16 personalities, all created from the same 8 Jungian cognitive functions. We'll also cover cognitive axes, which is how functions relate to one another. You can use this to identify people's personalities. And finally, we'll also cover some more experimental theories, some common misconceptions, and also some other miscellaneous things. And at the end, I'll tell you how you can find your own type. Now, just a quick disclaimer before we dive into this video. This is a synthesis of different frameworks, and it's not considered empirical science by the scientific community. We'll connect multiple things from multiple different theories, specifically Jungian analytical psychology, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, John Beebe's archetypal model, and the 4 sides of the mind. But just because this doesn't fit into objective reality doesn't mean it doesn't work. This video is based on things I've seen in myself and others, and things that I find useful in my life, so it's still applicable, just not universally proven. Here are the 16 personality types. You've probably seen these 4-letter codes before, and most people assume they just describe your personality traits. But in this system, those letters are actually an alias. They're a shorthand code for your cognitive function stack. Cognitive functions are the 8 components that define how we process our thoughts and experiences. In personality typology, these functions are defined by 2 primary variables: the functional goal, which is either judging or perceiving, and the psychological orientation, introversion or extroversion. Think of the cognitive functions as components in a system that helps the mind stay balanced by filtering and organizing the constant stream of data we receive from our environment. These 8 functions are split into 2 categories: 4 for judging and 4 for perceiving. A perceiving function, so sensing and intuition, is how you gather and observe information in the first place without jumping to conclusions. You're simply in a state of observation, either taking in raw physical details and external possibilities, or processing the internal impressions and patterns those details leave behind. A judging function, so thinking and feeling, is how you evaluate that information and make decisions. When you use one, you're actively organizing, categorizing, or assigning value to the data you've gathered. Before we break down the functions themselves, we need to redefine 2 words: introverted and extroverted. In this context, it has nothing to do with how social you are. It's purely about your psychological orientation. Every function is either introverted or extroverted, which dictates whether the psychological authority resides in the subject, which is you, or the object, which is the external world. An extroverted orientation aligns you with external conditions and collective norms. It's outward facing. An introverted orientation subordinates that external data to your internal structures and subjective impressions. It's inward facing. To keep it simple, remember this: extroverted functions look for the truth in the object. So for example, the world as it is, collective rules, and shared facts. Introverted functions look for the truth in the subject, such as the world as I see it, my internal logic, and my personal impressions. These orientations filter stimuli based on whether you're prioritizing tangible observations, abstract patterns, logical utilities, and more. You might notice a weird paradox with the last letter of the code. Most people think J means organized and P means messy. In this system, it actually identifies which function you use to interface with the outside world. For extroverts, the last letter matches their lead function, but for introverts, the last letter describes their second function, the one they show to the public. This is why an INTP is labeled as P, known as perceiver, even though their dominant mind is a judging function, also known as TI. The part the world actually sees is their secondary observer, extroverted intuition, also known as NA. Think of your stack as the specific order in which your brain prefers to use these functions. Now remember, we all have the same 8, but we just use them in different permutations or sequences. The higher a function sits in your stack, the more heavily you rely on it. So while the 4 letters tell us your type, the underlying functionality lies in how these 8 functions are prioritized and interlaced. Because these functions are so interconnected, they can manifest differently depending on where they sit in your stack. To keep things simple, I'm going to explain each function from the perspective of it being the dominant function, because it's where I'd assume we can see the function in its absolute purest form. Introverted thinking, known as TI, is a judging function that organizes the internal world by deconstructing information into its most fundamental principles to ensure logical consistency and precision. They don't demand that a concept produces an immediate, tangible result. Instead, they master the internal mechanics and blueprints of a system, leveraging them as a framework to understand exactly how and why something functions at its core. TI users ask themselves, does this make sense? Extroverted thinking, which is TE, is a judging function that organizes the external world by applying objective logic and empirical data to achieve the most effective result. They navigate the world by identifying what works based on observable evidence. They don't demand that reality conforms to their personal preferences. Instead, they master the laws and systems of the environment as they exist, leveraging them as tools to produce a tangible outcome. TE users ask themselves, does this work? Introverted feeling, known as FI, is a judging function that organizes the internal world by evaluating experiences and ideas against a personal system of values to maintain individual integrity. They navigate the world by identifying what is right based on internal harmony. They don't demand that their convictions conform to the expectations of the collective. Instead, they master the nuances of their own conscience and identity, leveraging them as a compass to ensure their life remains an honest reflection of their core self. FI users ask themselves, can I live with this? Extroverted feeling, known as FE, is a judging function that organizes the external world by aligning with the values, needs, and emotional states of the collective to achieve social harmony. They navigate the world by identifying what is socially appropriate or required based on the collective environment. They don't demand that the group conforms to their personal, private feelings. Instead, they master the cultural norms and emotional requirements of the atmosphere as they exist, leveraging them as tools to achieve a cohesive and unified outcome. FE users ask, is this acceptable to us? Introverted sensing, known as SI, is a perceiving function that organizes the internal world by grounding current experiences in highly detailed, stored impressions and historical precedents. They navigate the world by identifying what is reliable based on past data. They don't demand that every experience be a radical departure from the norm or a chaotic new adventure. Instead, they master the lessons of experience and the stability of routine, leveraging them as a foundation to ensure security, continuity, and precision. SI users ask themselves, how does this compare to what I know? Extroverted sensing, known as SE, is a perceiving function that experiences the external world by engaging directly with immediate physical data and sensory stimuli as they exist in the present moment. They navigate the world by identifying what is happening based on raw, unfiltered observation. They don't demand that the present moment fits into a long-term plan or complex theory. Instead, they master the details and demands of their immediate environment, leveraging them as opportunities to act with impact and realism. SE users ask themselves, what is the reality of the situation right now? Introverted intuition, known as NI, is a perceiving function that organizes the internal world by synthesizing complex, disparate data into singular, forward-looking insights and universal patterns. They navigate the world by identifying the underlying trajectory of events based on conceptual connections. They don't demand that reality remains confined to the surface level or immediate present. Instead, they master the hidden architecture of cause and effect, leveraging it as a roadmap to anticipate what is yet to come. NI users ask themselves, where is this going? Extroverted intuition, known as NE, is a perceiving function that organizes the external world by perceiving the interconnectedness of ideas and the infinite web of possibilities inherent in any given situation. They navigate the world by identifying what could be based on cross-contextual patterns. They don't demand that a situation stays confined to its current form or a singular outcome. Instead, they master the realm of potential and variety, leveraging them as a catalyst to spark innovation and discover new paths. Any users ask themselves, what else is possible? Now, remember how I said that all the functions are interconnected? It's actually a structural requirement. You literally cannot have one of these functions without its counterpart. This is what we call a cognitive axis. Think of it like a seesaw. Because the psyche is a balanced system, if one function is elevated into your conscious awareness, its opposite is tethered to the bottom. Here are the 4 universal axes. This means if you have SE, then you must have NI. If you have FE, you must have TI. The presence of one specific orientation necessitates its axial counterpart in a lower compensatory position. Because of this principle of axial symmetry, once you identify the first 2 functions, the dominant and auxiliary, the rest of the primary 4-function stack is automatically determined. For example, we have the INTP. which has TI and NE. And by identifying these first two, the rest of the stack is forced into place by their opposites. So for the first axes, so TI and FE, since introverted thinking, TI, is the dominant first function, its axial opposite, extroverted feeling, or FE, is forced into the inferior fourth position. For the second axes, which is NE and SI, since extroverted intuition, also known as NE, is the auxiliary second position, its partner, introverted sensing, or SI, must occupy the tertiary third position. Finding that TI-NE pairing reveals the whole stack, because once you have those, you have the primary stack, also known as the ego. And once you have the ego, you'll also know the shadow. Since the mind is a balanced system, the shadow, which is your bottom four functions, is just an inverted reflection of your ego, which is your top four. Once you know the first four, the last four are known too. The rule is simple. The shadow functions allow the exact same order as your primary stack, but the orientation is flipped. If your first function is introverted, your fifth function is the extroverted version of that same faculty. Using the example of an INTP, the hero function or the dominant function is TI, which is introverted thinking. Now, if we know the hero or dominant function, then that means the opposing fifth position must be extroverted thinking. For the parent or auxiliary position or the second position, whichever one you want to call it, that would be NE, also known as extroverted intuition. Which means number 6, also known as the critic, would be NI, which is introverted intuition. Then number 3 would be SI, which is introverted sensing, which means the number 7 position, also known as the trickster, would be SE or extroverted sensing. And this leads the fourth function, also known as the inferior function, to be FE, which is extroverted feeling. Which means your 8th function, also known as the demon function, is FI, introverted feeling. It's also worth noting that these functions alternate in charge across the entire 8-function stack. The first position, known as the hero position, is always positive and proactive, while the second parent position is more restrictive or negative. This positive and negative pattern oscillates all the way down into the shadow. It explains why you generally feel naturally confident and optimistic in your odd-numbered functions, 1, 3, 5, and 7, but feel more self-critical, pressured, or defensive in your even-numbered functions, such as 2, 4, 6, and 8. To summarize, you only need to know the first two functions to identify the ego. And once you have those, you have the shadow too. By understanding the cognitive axes, you can type people much faster. If you see someone using one function, you can verify if you're right by looking for its axial partner. If you see the counterpart function in use, you've confirmed their cognitive circuit. A common criticism of personality typing, like the MBTI, is that it puts people into a static box. You might test as an introvert, but finding yourself acting as the life of the party on a Friday night. You might think that you're changing from an INTP to an ENTP or an ENTJ, depending on the day. In reality, your core type isn't changing. Instead, if you're experiencing the dynamic nature of your mind, in personality typology, the theory of the 4 sides of the mind suggests that your conscious 4-letter type is only 25% of the equation. Your psyche is not a singular static entity, but a dynamic ecosystem consisting of 4 distinct cognitive configurations that you shift between based on environmental demands, maturity, and stress. While personality typology is not a hard empirical science, this framework provides a highly useful lens for understanding human adaptability and growth. I've seen a lot of people make a lot of reductive assumptions that lead to superficial typing. So here are a few things I just want to clear up before we continue. You do not just have a type. You inhabit a cognitive ecosystem. Your 4-letter code is merely your primary stack, not a static box you have to stay within. Typology describes the cognitive origin of a behavior, known as the why, not the behavior itself, which is the what. 2 people can perform the exact same action while using entirely different cognitive functions. Assuming an introvert lacks the capacity for extroversion is false, because every ego has a subconscious and an unconscious. Every individual has access to both orientations. The letter just indicates which one you prioritize as your ultimate authority. Every human mind contains 4 different personality types operating at once. When you act out of character, you aren't breaking your mold. You're simply just shifting your psychological weight into a different configuration. For example, if you're an introverted INTP, you can absolutely be an extroverted ESFJ at a party by shifting into your subconscious. However, because your ego is your most energy efficient state, you only sustain that subconscious state for so long before your social battery drains, and then you have to revert to your ego to recharge. True psychological maturity requires exploring the other sides of your mind. In traditional Jungian psychology, Carl Jung called this process individuation. He described the ultimate goal of human development as a circumambulation of the self, moving around the center of your psyche so that no part of your mind remains in the dark. Applied to the four sides theory, this means you must 1. Overcome your fears by integrating your subconscious, 2. Integrate your insecurities and boundaries by acknowledging your unconscious/shadow, and then 3. Accept your capacity for radical destruction and change by understanding your superego. Even if you successfully master your 4 inner types, you'll still only account for 25% of the total cognitive spectrum available to humanity. This is why working with others could significantly amplify your success. Partnering with people whose egos naturally occupy the spaces where you are blind allows you to pool your cognitive resources. Now, what is your personality type? The easiest way to find your personality type is to take the 16 personalities test. However, keep in mind that the tests can be flawed. So just because you get a type doesn't mean that it's your type.